Okay, so welcome everyone to the first talk of Music Day here at the University of Gloucestershire Media Festival 2019. I'm extremely pleased to welcome back probably our most popular guest lecturer that we had last semester, who came and spoke to us about working within the recording industry. And today we've got Lara Baker from The Bakery, who's going to be here to talk to us about women in music. So if you'd like to give a warm welcome to our guest, we'll get started.
Cool, thank you. Is my mic working okay? Can everyone hear me all right? Yep, all good? Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to really quickly whiz through some of the issues around diversity in the music industry, primarily focusing on women in music, the gender pay gap, Me Too, and efforts towards equality. If we've got time, which we might not have, I'll also quickly talk about other aspects of diversity, so looking at race, looking at disability, and looking at LGBTQ representation in the music industry. Cool. So just a little bit about me. Some of you guys may have been at my talk a couple of months back, so I won't spend too long on this. But I am a consultant in the music business, so I work for a lot of different clients. I've been doing this for about a year now. Before that, I was the marketing and events director for the Association of Independent Music. AIM is the organisation that represents all of the independent record labels and artists in the UK. And my job at AIM was to run the events programme of conferences and to help independent labels with their marketing and distribution. I was at AIM for 13 years, and for the year that I've been a consultant since, I have been head of programming for BBC Music Introducing Live, which is a big event aimed at young people wanting to get into music. I've also worked on the Great Escape Festival, which I'm working on right now actually, Liverpool Sound City, the International Live Music Conference. I consult for the Musicians Union, and I work with the MMF, which is the Music Managers Forum. So I do a lot of events work and a lot of diversity projects as well. And that's my Twitter, Lara K. Baker, if you want to say hello or do some trolling. So yeah, in a nutshell, my business is a consultancy, and I work for a lot of different events clients. So diversity is a really big part of what I've done for many years, both at AIM and since. And for me, it's really important that we focus on making the music industry as inclusive and diverse as possible, which historically it hasn't been. It's an industry that's been very much run by older white men. And to some degree, that continues to be the case, but there's a lot of really great initiatives aiming to shake things up a little bit. Start with a quote from Beyonce, because it's a Women in Music talk, so where else could you start? This is what she reckons. And that's a really nice idea, and I hope that she's right. I hope that she's sending this message from the future. And she's very serious about it. Here she goes, she's burning cars and stuff and pointing. But the thing is, that's not really the case in the music industry right now in 2019. There's a lot of issues facing women, and it's quite an imbalanced business. So these are some of the issues. Women in the audience, don't get too stressed out and put off by this. But basically, I'm going to talk you through each of these issues and a bit of background on them, and then some of the cool initiatives and campaigns that are aiming to change things. So first up, there's a lack of women in senior roles and boardrooms. So there might be quite an equal balance at lower levels, but at senior levels, it's very, very imbalanced, and it's still very much a white male business. I'm going to talk to you about the gender pay gap, which you might have heard about. I'm going to talk to you about unconscious bias, the challenges around having children, maternity leave, and parenthood versus the music industry, which is a very 24/7 business. Female artists, they have, I mean, you could do a whole talk on the challenges that female artists face. The lack of artists on festival lineups, radio and streaming playlists. Women are really underrepresented. And then certain areas of the business as well are more imbalanced in terms of gender than others. So we'll look at those. And then, of course, since last year with Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too hashtag and campaign online, there's been a lot to talk about in terms of sexual harassment, assault, and Me Too. And unfortunately, in the music industry, that is a big problem still. So that might leave the ladies in the room thinking, what's the point? But don't panic. I hope no one is troubled by strobing. So the challenges. Let's dig into them a little bit more and sort of see what the problems really are. So there's some data which is really interesting. If you guys get online, have a look at the UK Music Diversity Study, which they do every year, but they only actually release data from it every few years to sort of track progress. And this study really looks at race and gender in the music industry and how diverse we are. But I'm hoping that one day it will also expand to look at LGBTQ and disabilities and more aspects of diversity, because it's not just about getting equality in terms of race and gender. So that study shows that women make up 60% of people at intern and entry-level stages. So in the sort of 18 to 24 age group and in the lowest level roles, there's actually more women than men in the music industry. But as you move up into older age groups, such as 30 plus, or more senior levels like senior manager, director, head of, women make up only 30% of those roles. So there's a problem where more women than men are coming into the industry and they're not making it to those senior levels as it stands. Women make up over half of the workforce in the age group 25 to 34, only 33% of the workforce aged 45 to 64. So where are those women going? What's happening in those years? And that raises the question, what's happening? So is it going to become more equal over time in the music industry because we have that equal or, more women than men entering at intern level and entry stages? Is it going to become more equal over time? Or has it always been that there's been a fairly equal amount at lower levels and women are hitting a glass ceiling and leaving the music industry? We don't really know because we've only been tracking this for 3 years. And it's an interesting debate. So faced with that data, a lot of people in the music industry were asked by Music Week and Billboard and other trade press what they thought about the lack of women in senior levels. And there were quite a few interesting perspectives put out. So this is Tara Richardson, who is the manager of Foals, and she says she's embarrassed to be in an industry with those statistics. And if you have a read through her quote there, she's flagging that it's really hard as a mother to work in music when you're meant to be at gigs at night and it's a sort of round-the-clock kind of business. But she's also flagging that there's a lot more of that ego-led front with men in music, and it's an industry that still rewards and promotes that arrogance. So that's Tara's view. Sorry, I'm whizzing through this really fast because I started a bit late. Jane Third is one of the most powerful women in the British music industry now. She's doing really fantastic things. She was at Because Music. She signed Christine and the Queens and lots of other great acts. She's at PS now. And she's saying, if you don't feel like you're being compensated enough for the work that you're doing, if you're always going to have to work twice as hard as a guy, why would you want to keep doing that? So she thinks women are getting tired of the music industry and the gender pay gap and not being treated equally, and they're leaving. So I just do want to say that there are some women in senior positions across the music industry. It's not impossible. So MMF, well, this is actually slightly out of date now because in the last month or two, lots of changes have happened at senior levels. So this says MMF, WIN, BASCA, and the Featured Artists Coalition are all industry associations with female CEOs. Well, actually, in the last month, both WIN and BASCA, their CEOs have left and been replaced by men. All 3 major labels have men at the helm. If we look at the AIM board, where I used to work, that has improved. It's gradually gone from just 1 in 20 board members being women to 30% women. So that's good, but it's still not equal. Some industry boards, quite a lot of industry boards still have no women on them. And boards are, where the power is. That's where the decisions are made. It's where, money moves around. So it's really important to get diversity at board level. So these are some of the female CEOs that I wanted to mention to you guys. Alison Wenham was the CEO of WIN and previously AIM. She's recently left and gone independent. Lucy Caswell is the CEO of the Featured Artists Coalition. She's doing a great job for artists around the UK. Vic Bain was the CEO of BASCA. She's just recently left and been replaced. That's working with composers. And on the end there, Annabella Coldrick, she is the CEO of the Music Managers Forum. So there are powerful women in the music industry. You might notice all these ladies are white. So we do have, as well as a gender imbalance in the music industry, we do have a race imbalance. And you have to think about intersectionality when you look at diversity. And the challenges faced by women of colour are even more than those faced by white women. There are also a lot of women in the music industry who've created their own businesses very successfully. And actually, there are some incredible women of colour that fall into this category, including these two ladies. So Nadia Khan is an amazing Asian woman who's a friend of mine. She manages Lethal Bizzle, and she started an organisation called Women in Control to really try and encourage young women to thrive in the music business. And Kanya King is the founder of the Mobos, and she founded that sort of 20 years ago as a single mum with £100 from the Prince's Trust. And she started this incredible movement that highlights and celebrates black music. Okay, so next challenge is the gender pay gap. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it's an amazing thing, actually, that the government introduced this. I mean, they're not doing many amazing things lately, but they basically introduced regulations where any company in the UK that has over 250 members of staff has to report their figures and their statistics of what they're paying their male staff and their female staff, and basically do some calculations to reveal what their gender pay gap is. Now, it turned out when this was introduced last year that the average gender pay gap for any company, not just music, for any company in the UK is 14%. So in the UK, on average, men are being paid 14% more than women. Now, it may or may not surprise you to hear that it's much worse than that in the music industry. And so on average, women working at the 3 major labels earn 33.8% less than men. At Warner Music, who had the worst gender pay gap, it's 49% less than men. There's an average of just 31% of leadership positions at major labels held by women. At Live Nation, they have a 46% gender pay gap. That's enormous. And what's even more worrying is an 88% difference in bonuses paid between men and women. So if you're a guy working at Live Nation, your bonus is probably twice as much, nearly, as that of a female colleagues, just because you're a guy. Now, these are 2018 statistics. On Friday, well, these are 2017 statistics that were released last year. On Friday, the new statistics came out, and every company here has improved by maybe 2%. So it's going in the right direction because obviously they're under the microscope now, but it's still an enormous, enormous gap that really shows just how big of a problem we have. What's good to see is this means that there have been more female promotions and appointments since this was introduced, which is long overdue. But I think what's a shame is that this is only for companies with over 250 members of staff, because in the music industry, that's really only about 5 or 6 companies. You know, it's Live Nation and it's the majors. If you had to do that reporting for every company with, say, 50 members of staff or 100 members of staff, we'd get a much bigger picture of the music industry, and so many more companies would be forced to improve reduce their gender pay gap. I won't read this out because it's a bit long, but Warner Music basically put out a statement because their gender pay gap was so big that they felt that they had to talk about the fact that they're really working on making progress, and they're looking forensically across their entire company to activate the right diversity and inclusion strategies. And I know that they've since set up a task force which is aiming to support minorities within Warner to thrive, which is good. Unconscious bias, I'll just quickly mention. This is at the root of why we have quite a big gender imbalance in the music business. Now, what unconscious bias means is that our deep-rooted assumptions and stereotypes affect decisions on who we hire and who we promote to senior roles. And a phenomenon that's really common is that we hire in our own image. So therefore, if there's a white man at the top of a company, he will hire people who kind of remind him of himself, i.e. white men. And thus the cycle continues. And where we've seen this in action, and it's really interesting, is with orchestras. There was a study done some time ago where if you do blind auditions for orchestras, so you put the musician sort of behind a screen, so the people selecting the musicians for an orchestra can't actually see whether they're male or female, far, far more women got through into the orchestra and got selected than when you could see if they were male or female. So orchestras now almost always have blind auditions. It's sad that it has to be that way, but at least it's helping. In the US, the Grammys chief got really criticized a couple of years ago with the Grammys So Male hashtag, when there were almost no female winners or performers. They established a task force to address this, but from what I can see, nothing has really changed there, and they're still getting a lot of criticism about that. Quickly mention motherhood. I'm in my 30s now. A lot of my friends are having kids, and it is tough managing that. Oh, hang on. It's tough managing that in the music industry. I mean, obviously, mothers and fathers, but generally speaking, the primary caregiver in most families is still often the mother. And it can be really challenging to balance having a child with long office hours, expected to be at gigs in the evening, festivals, regular travel. The music industry is always on. And on top of that, a lot of friends that I know in particular are reporting being overlooked for promotions in their 30s, bad maternity packages, problems returning to the workplace after maternity, and then the challenges of juggling that once you have a kid. So it is a really hard business for parents, and of course that often affects the mother more than the father, not always. Female artists. Now, I'm sure you guys have probably seen what I'm about to show you before. Have you guys seen this? The Reading and Leeds lineup. I mean, this pretty much comes out each year. This is, the one I've put up here is from 2015, but someone generally does this for the Reading and Leeds lineup every year, whereby this one here is the full lineup, obviously, and if you take out all the bands and artists that don't have women in, so you've just got the female artists or bands with a woman in them, that's the one on the right there. So it's pretty shocking how few female artists get booked for festivals, and Reading and Leeds is one of the worst offenders there, so is Wireless, and there are lots of others that get criticised. So 17% of international festival headliners were women in 2017. So that, I mean, I've seen debates about this question. What's going on here? Why is that? Are there less female artists? Well, Fender put out statistics last year saying that more than 50% of their guitars now are bought by women. So if there were less female artists in the past, that hopefully shouldn't be true in the future in a few years' time. Do female artists sell less tickets? Some promoters have used that as their excuse. Is it true? And if it is, why? And whose job is it to change this? Festival promoters are saying, I book the lineup that sells the tickets. I'm a business, I'm not a charity. This doesn't just affect female artists at festivals. Women are often really underrepresented on radio as well. If you look at radio playlists and count up how many male artists versus how many female artists there are, it's probably going to be the case that there are more men. And this is massively true in country music right now. There's a huge fallout going on in the States because country music radio doesn't play female artists almost at all. And actually, I was just at South by Southwest in Texas, and I thought, I'll have a listen and I'll see if it really is that bad. And it's true. Country music radio does not play female artists. And then when you look at digital streaming playlists as well, if you look at Spotify or Apple, they heavily feature male artists in most genres. I mean, pop is the exception, but if you look at hip-hop, grime, if you look at country, there's a real imbalance in terms of gender on those streaming playlists. Is it because streaming customers want to listen to male artists more? Or are they being served more male artists than female ones? I don't know. It's very easy for different parts of the music industry to point the finger at the fans or at other parts of the industry as the root of this problem. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we're good. So another thing to think about is that certain areas of the business are more male-dominated or in some cases more female-dominated than others. So some stats on that. 16% of songwriters registered with PRS are female. That's very low, and PRS are doing a lot of work to try and encourage female writers to join and to collaborate. Studios. If you want to be a producer, an engineer, mastering, mixer, that is a very, very male-dominated world. There are a few women who are doing really well in this area. There's a lady called Katie Tavini who runs Red Bull's Normal Not Novelty. She does, I think she's mixing or mastering, I'm not sure. But she's really trying to encourage women into the studio. But it's very common if you are a female engineer or producer or writer or artist that you might be in the studio with sort of 5 or 6 other people. It's very likely that you'll be the only female. The live sector as well. Tour managers, agents, promoters, that's a super male-dominated area of the business. DJs. DJ Mag put out a list, they do it every year, their top 100 DJs. It's public voted, which is sort of why they go, well, it's not our fault. Only 6 DJs on that list of 100 were female. So why is this the case? Why is this imbalance so pronounced in the music business? And how do we go about fixing it? It needs to be fixed at lots of different levels, at education. So, young women need to be shown that they can be producers, they can be tour managers, they can go into these more male-dominated areas. We need more courses, we need funding. PRS, for example, have lots of pots of funding to encourage female writers, that kind of stuff. There's so many different solutions needed to address the imbalance. Onto another lovely topic. Sexual harassment, assault, and Me Too. I'm sorry that this is quite a depressing talk so far. I'll get on to the less depressing bit in a minute. So following the Harvey Weinstein allegations last year, the Me Too hashtag and campaign sort of spread like wildfire across Twitter and the internet, and so many women shared their stories of sexual harassment and assault. And a huge number of those were from not just the film, but also from the music industry, where it turns out, a really pronounced problem. That it has been that way for a long time, but it wasn't really talked about until the Harvey Weinstein stuff happened. I actually did a TEDx talk about this in Liverpool last year. And it's a really big talking point in the music industry now that we are finally sort of acknowledging that there's a problem. And really the root of this is that the music industry has a culture where all the positions of power are held by men, or have been historically and mostly still are. And that goes together with the fact that within the music industry there's very much blurred boundaries between what's your personal life and your social life and what's work. So you're at gigs, you're at festivals, you're drinking, you're traveling, you're out late. And when those blurred boundaries and that power imbalance come together, then that's where you get the sexual harassment and assault problem. And in the last year, since the Harvey Weinstein allegations, numerous senior male music industry execs and band members have had allegations made against them. I'm sure all of you can name lots of these. Obviously, R. Kelly and Michael Jackson most recently with the documentaries, but also on a much sort of closer to home setting as well. Lots of bands and people in the music industry that I know have had allegations against them. If any of you are interested in this topic generally, have a read of Lily Allen's book that came out last year. She's got some really interesting points to make on this subject. And she describes actually being sexually assaulted by a music industry exec in that book. And this quote pretty much says what I just explained about how the hierarchies and the power, toxic behavior by men towards women is tolerated and even celebrated sometimes in the music business. Drugs are allowed, money swirls about, bad behavior is tolerated, it's rock and roll. And that's where the problem lies. Okay, so that was all the sort of depressing challenges and problems and what we're dealing with as women in music. And of course, for the guys in the audience, it's really important to just be aware of this imbalance and also to be an ally and to call out harassment when you see it and to call out inequality when you see it. So I think it's really important, and I'm really glad that there are guys and girls in the audience today. So these are some of the cool things that are in place at the moment that are going to tackle this gender imbalance and diversity issue that we have as a music business. First up, there are lots of networks. So networks for women in music to help build contacts, confidence, and to provide mentoring, job opportunities, events, and more. So I would definitely recommend joining these. She said so, if any of the girls in the audience have heard of it. It's a brilliant network that gives mentoring and job ops and all kinds of stuff, and it's global, it's not just in the UK. Women in Control, that's founded by Nadia, Lethal Bizzle's manager, and puts on lots of events and highlights the work of really amazing women. Girls I Rate is a network set up by Carla Marie Williams, who's a songwriter who wrote some of Beyoncé's Lemonade album. And again, events and information and network building. Women in Music is an American association. I moved to New York with work 3 or 4 years ago for a while. Didn't know anyone there, and I joined Women in Music, and they introduced me to loads of people, and I made business connections, I made friends. It was a really cool thing to join. And Flex is a sort of networking group that just get together for drinks maybe once every month or so, and is really good just for building a network. Then there's some initiatives that are more training-based, aiming to give women skills in areas where men tend to dominate. So Red Bull do Normal Not Novelty, which is a DJ and production workshop that happens regularly at their studios, and they have lots of great guest lecturers and speakers on that. Similarly, Smirnoff, you'll see there's a lot of brands in this area because brands want to demonstrate that they care about these issues, which is really great because it means that they pump money into stuff that matters. So Smirnoff do Equalizing Music, which gives mentoring and performance opportunities at really big festivals for female DJs. Public speaking training. Me and my old CEO, Alison Wenham, we set up a free public speaking training workshop for women in music because one thing I noticed booking a lot of events is that women would often say no to being invited to speak. So there was a sort of confidence issue. So Alison and I set up these public speaking training workshops. I didn't lead them, she does, because she's much better at public speaking than me. But through those, we've been able to train lots of young women in the music business with public speaking skills so that they can go out and join panels and have a more representative industry at conferences. PRS Foundation, some of you guys might have heard of this charity that's part of the PRS. They have a program called Key Change, and Key Change is an international initiative which empowers women to transform the future of music. And basically, festivals sign up to the Key Change Pledge, where they commit to working towards a 50-50 gender split by 2022. Lots of festivals, both in the UK and overseas, have signed up to this pledge. And conferences as well. So all of the conferences I work on, I program with a 50-50 gender split on speakers. I'm not waiting until 2022. It can be done right now. But for those who find it a bit more challenging, they've got a few years to figure it out. So there's 100 festivals and conferences now that are doing that pledge. I booked the speakers for BBC Music Introducing Live last year. There was 520-something speakers, I think, and I booked it 50-50. 50% were female. So, I mean, if it can be done with 518 speakers, then I don't see why all the other industry events can't do it as well. So another part of positive change is acknowledging and celebrating female success stories. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I sat down with Music Week, the magazine, and we decided to start a Women in Music Awards to really acknowledge success both in terms of artists and women working behind the scenes. So that's been running now for, I think, about 7 years. And really, we want this awards not to need to exist in the future. We don't want to specifically highlight female success. We want to celebrate everyone's success. But we need to get to the point where things are balanced. So for now, this awards is helping to move things in the right direction. So there's a Roll of Honour, there's Campaigner of the Year, Rising Star Award, Outstanding Contribution, and also a company award for a company that really excels in diversity, which is quite important because we really need all the companies in the music business to start thinking about the role that they play in positive change. And there's loads of events you can go to. So some of you might be aware of some of these. I started a Women in Music conference for AIM, which is supported by the Mayor of London. They've now rolled that into their 3-day AIM Connected event, which happened last week. The Musicians Union have an annual Women in Music event, which I programme. Lots of conferences now are focusing on a balanced lineup. And I think women in music panels and discussions at events, I think we need to move past that really now. I think we need men involved in the discussion, and I don't think that women should just be on panels as women in. I think they should be on every panel. So whether it's about production or the live sector or whatever, it's a bit tokenistic for a conference or event to just have a women in panel and think that they've ticked the diversity box. Mentoring is super important in addressing the gender imbalance. So She Said So have a mentoring scheme which anyone can join. She Said So, it's free, and anyone can apply to be mentored. So I've been a mentor on the programme. So any of you guys could sign up at She Said So. The Musicians Union also have a mentoring programme which I helped them to launch, which is running right now actually. They're currently about to select the mentees and the mentors and start that process. Or you can just find your own mentor. You don't need a programme to find one for you. Sorry, I'm whizzing through this super fast. So there's a number of initiatives aiming to tackle the sexual harassment problem as well. So the Musicians Union, they have an email address which, if you're a victim of harassment or assault, you can report that to their email address. And they can provide you with either some support, legal assistance, or if one person gets reported to that email address quite a lot, then they can take action against that person potentially. AIF, the Festivals Association, the Association of Independent Festivals, they have the Safer Spaces campaign, whereby 60+ festivals have signed up to tackle sexual harassment and assault on site at their events. Safe Gigs for Women does a similar thing at live events. And it's just so important that men are allies and call out harassment and inappropriate behaviour whenever you see it. I'm going to go through this one super fast because it's really long. Or just skip it altogether, why not? So there's still an awful lot that the music industry isn't doing that we need to do to tackle gender inequality. So I think we need much more flexible working programs to help with mothers and carers and all of that kind of thing. We need improved and equal maternity and paternity leave packages. We're still way behind certain European countries on that front, and it will make a huge difference. We need programs to support new parents back into the workplace after they've had their kids. We need an industry support system to provide help to those who've experienced sexual harassment and assault. Companies need to have policies for reporting and addressing sexual harassment and bullying, and procedures to investigate and deal with those problems when they happen. We need to invest in young female talent to receive training in areas of the business where women are underrepresented, like production, tour management, so on. And we need to hire and promote more female talent into the really senior positions in the music industry, so it's not just equal at the bottom and men at the top. So if I've got time, yep, a little bit of time, I'm going to quickly talk about the bigger picture of diversity. I mean, each of these areas could be a talk in themselves, so it's a little bit rushed to sort of quickly tag them onto the end of one that's focusing on women in music, but just to give you guys a little bit more context. The music industry needs to improve representation and treatment of BAME people, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities. And I think what's important to recognize here is that there's no real one quick fix for diversity, because the complexities of the different challenges faced by different minority groups must be considered. Even if you just take disabilities, for example, the challenges faced by, say, a musician in a wheelchair who can't get onto stage in most venues are completely different to the challenges faced by a dyslexic person working at a record label. So there are so many different solutions needed to take diversity forward for everybody. And another one that we perhaps don't talk about as much, but that I keep banging on about in the music industry is social background. Because I think the music industry is very much set up for rich people. So even just becoming a musician, to have instruments, to have music lessons, that tends to be more privileged people. So you end up with a lot of quite privileged people becoming successful artists. And then there's things like unpaid internships, which are meant to be illegal, but are still really commonplace across the music industry. So how are you meant to support yourself if you're doing an unpaid internship? Well, it tends to be that, you know, people with wealthy families end up in those positions, and then they get the jobs. There's also a lot of nepotism as well. I know so many people who are doing very well, who are the son of or the daughter of some CEO. It's very much that kind of industry, and I think that needs to change. I think this should be an industry that people from poorer backgrounds and anyone can succeed in. So to talk a little bit about race and racism in the music business, back to those UK music diversity statistics, they found that Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, the representation in the UK music industry was up from 15.6% in 2016 to 17.8% in 2018. So diversity as far as race in the music industry is improving at the moment, but it's the same story as with women in music. At the top, it's still very much not diverse. So at lower levels, things are looking very good, but how do we help women and minorities to reach those higher positions? And a great organisation to flag up on this topic is Love Music, Hate Racism, who I do a lot of work with. And their mission is really to use artists who have, you know, huge fan bases and huge audiences and a lot of influence to just spread a message against racism and about inclusion. And they have people like Ed Sheeran and Stormzy and Dave and loads of great artists campaigning as part of their work. LGBTQ. It's hard to know, actually, how inclusive the music industry is towards LGBTQ people, because there's just no data. There's been no studies on this, and you know, you can generally sort of, it's very easy to identify when you look around a room, you know, how many men there are versus how many women, but not so much for LGBTQ. So there's not really any stats. But recently, an organisation was established to make sure that LGBTQ people in music are encouraged and are supported and are represented. And that's called Pride in Music. It was set up just a few months ago. And they're actually having a huge presence at London Pride this year, which should be great. as well as the charity Stonewall. You guys might have heard of Stonewall. They are working in music increasingly now, and they offer ally training and also leadership courses for LGBTQ workers. So a lot of the big companies are getting Stonewall in to make sure that their staff are trained in how to be an ally and that they provide opportunities for some of their LGBTQ team members. Disabilities, I touched on this a minute ago. It's such a huge topic, and I went to the Disabled Workers Conference on behalf of the Musicians Union last year with some of their musician members who have disabilities, and it really shocked me actually just how many different challenges disabled people in music are facing because their disabilities are so varied and because they exist in such small numbers. It's hard to get their challenges prioritised by companies and by the business. So Drake Music Scotland and the Musicians Union, they work together on a campaign called Get Me On Stage, which is about how, whilst pretty much all venues are accessible for audiences because there are laws around that and they have to be, very few of them are accessible for artists. And there are artists in wheelchairs who go on tours and they can't get on stages. They have to climb out of their wheelchair and climb onto stages, and it's really degrading and an awful experience. And I didn't realize sort of just how big a problem that is. So they are working together to try and make music venues to be more accessible for the artists. There's also Attitude is Everything. They're a charity working to improve access to live music for deaf and disabled people by working with venues and the music industry. And they're very good at calling out venues or events that aren't accessible and sort of naming and shaming, which is quite important, I think. And not so much under disabilities, but another sort of area of diversity and area of the real human side of the music industry to think about is mental health issues and depression and anxiety. This is becoming much more of a talking point in the music industry over the last few years, especially because there's been a few high-profile deaths and suicides. So if we think about Avicii and more recently, sadly, Keith Flint, there are a lot of people in the music industry struggling with anxiety and depression, and particularly artists who have the highs and lows of touring, and particularly male artists who perhaps don't have the chance to talk as much about these issues with each other. And so we as an industry, we need to do better on this, and we need to provide more support. And if anyone is interested in knowing more about this topic and how to help or to reach out for help, Music Support and Help Musicians UK are the two main charities that are working in that area to provide mental health support in music. And that's for musicians and for people behind the scenes. But every company really should have a mental health first aider and should have resources for people who need help in that area. So really, just to wrap up, it doesn't really matter if you're sat in this room as a white male with no disabilities, and so most of these things I've outlined don't apply to you, or whether you're sat in this room as someone who is a person of color or female or with a disability. It's everyone's job to fix this, and if you are not a minority, you can be an ally. So really, I just hope that everyone in this room takes away from this that we all need to address this issue. And actually, one of the main things I often mention when I'm speaking to companies about diversity is that a more diverse board and a more diverse workforce, actually there's proven data that it makes companies more profitable. So if companies and if people don't want to prioritize diversity for human reasons and because it's the right thing to do, then prioritize it for money. So I think that's it. So here's a load of websites, and I'm sure I can provide these slides for you guys if anyone wants to check these out. But these are lots of different websites with information on the things I've mentioned. I've done quite a few Huffington Post blogs on the gender pay gap and sexual harassment and all of those issues in the music industry. UK Music's good for all of the data and statistics. There's the Music Week Women in Music Awards, PRS Foundation Programme, the various networks I mentioned, like She Said So and Girls I Rate. Lily Allen's book is really worth reading. There's also another book, which I haven't read yet, but I'm very excited to read, by Dorothy Carvello, who was the first female A&R at Atlantic Records in the US in the 70s. And her book apparently is really shocking about the kind of stuff that went on towards women in the music industry sort of 30, 40 years ago. Love Music, Hate Racism. Anyone can get involved in the amazing work they do. They have stalls at festivals. You can just go and help out. I'd really encourage everyone to do that. Pride in Music and Attitude is Everything for the disability awareness work. Yeah, so that is it. And I went through that so quickly, so I'm sure that was a bit overwhelming, and I spoke very quickly. But does anyone have any questions? Or?
Unfortunately, I've got time.
Okay.
We have another talk coming, but I'm sure that you might be among them.
Yeah, of course.
So can we give a big hand for this lovely talk?